Welcome back to another episode of Preacher in the Hat. Eric and Chris are arguing about some plans that they have not had yet. Dad's ordering Braves tickets, I think. We got a lot going on in the studio. But my name is Derek. Across from me is Eric. And also across from me is my dad, Steve, behind the cameras. And on the hot mic is the one and only Chris Sumter, who has neglected to have dinner with Eric, and I don't let y'all take it.
I would take it a step further. I would take it a step. Actually, you know what? I won't take it a step further. Yeah, he's neglected to have dinner with me. He talks about it all the time. Well, we need to do this. Trying to schedule impromptu ski trips. Which is like one of the last things that can possibly be impromptu when you live in Alabama, and last week, my wife and I babysat Derek's kids so that Chris and Derek could go out to dinner without me and their wives. So it's whatever. And he's trying to he tries to backtrack. Say, whoa, I was gonna.
The meal was trash.
I was gonna call you this week.
Did I tell you that? The meal was trash. It's terrible. Tasted like sawdust.
Trey Luna is
I'm sure it did.
It was delicious.
I'm sure.
Yeah, it was great. Well, shout out Trey Luna over in Hoover, Alabama. Y'all go. It's delicious. Go grab you some.
I would have loved to go. I would have loved to get
that would be a good experience.
That would have been fun.
Yeah.
But then who would have kept the kids? So Chris knew you could keep the kids. Wouldn't be able to keep Derek's kids, and Derek couldn't go.
Just used me as a
that's what it
babysitter.
was.
You know what would be perfect?
What's that?
To invite Eric and his wife out to dinner with me and my wife, and then Derek and his wife show up.
That would not be
now
funny.
we blew that plan. That would have been.
I'll just go ahead and leave. Go somewhere else.
At least you'd have an evening with your wife, right, Eric?
Yeah.
Which would be great anyhow. So.
Well, Chris is always the bringer of the gifts when it comes to our. We've talked about this before, but Chris always hits a gas station
You're
or something
using the
like
word
that.
gift liberally
Yeah.
here.
Well, I mean, it's gifts. It's someone's buying something for you, but he's always bringing the Diet Dr.
Widow's Mite.
What? Anyways, he's bringing the stuff, a Diet Dr. Pepper or something. I'm not. For a while, he kept bringing Dad Grape-A-Co's, and he never drank them.
No, I don't drink Grape-A-Co's now. So.
But anyways, so Chris is always doing that. But I wanted to shake things up a little bit. I got you fellas something.
Oh boy! All right.
Don't get excited.
All right. Here we go.
Here you go, Chris. We'll describe this for our listeners.
Okay.
Wish some sand in my boots.
All right. So what we have here,
Zero sugar sweet
the
tea.
Ryl Company, which is spelled, Chris, if you can go to a camera shot here, I don't know. The Ryl, RYL. This claims to be sweet tea. However, it does have zero sugar, Dad, so you can partake.
Whoa, I can. Yeah, baby.
Crafted by Morgan Wallen. For those of you, if you live under a rock,
Put them up, put them
or
up.
probably,
put 'em
Dad
up,
might
put 'em
not
up,
know.
Knock them
I
back,
know who.
knock 'em
I know
back.
of
Okay,
him.
okay.
I know
The
who
name.
he is. Yeah, I know
Morgan
the
Wallen,
name.
the country star.
Young. He's a young.
Somehow, some way. Now, but wait, hold on.
Oh,
Before you,
don't
no,
pop
you
it
can
yet?
pop it. That's okay. You can go
Okay.
and pop
All right,
it.
I'm
But
just gonna
before you
pop it.
drink it, this is what the standard is being set here for you because this is what you must judge it by.
Okay.
Because we talked about this when we did the Faygo cotton candy.
Yes.
If it says it on the can or if it says it on the bottle, that's what you're telling me to expect. So you need to judge this because it says on the bottle, tastes like Tennessee. I don't know what that means. I don't know what that means, but this is how we're going to
That's
It
what
says it's always delicious, zero sugar, nothing artificial.
Yeah.
About 20 milligrams of caffeine.
Yeah, so keep it light there,
I'm
Dad.
gonna
There's a little
say,
caffeine.
Excellent source of vitamin C.
But anyways,
Made with-
you got to determine whether or not you like this based on if it tastes like Tennessee.
They say it's made by polyphenol technology?
It's that's
some
their
tech-
sweetener.
it's their-
It's
yeah.
their artificial
Okay,
sweetener.
all right.
Oh, Derek.
Oh man, give me the Faygo all day.
Yeah, it tastes like Tennessee.
It tastes
yeah.
like the bottom of Morgan Wallen's boots.
I was gonna
gonna say,
does Tennessee. I was gonna say, does Tennessee taste like a basement? Because that's what it smells like.
It tastes like a basement.
Wow.
Hey,
Wow.
I've never tasted Morgan Wallen's boots, but
you
That
don't
might-
need to.
that
I
might
think
be
you
it.
might. You maybe just.
Chris,
did.
would you like mine to take it home so you could have a
He
little extra?
signed off on this.
I know.
Crafted by Morgan
And
Wallen.
they had the audacity to put the word delicious on here.
I'm a sweet tea fiend.
I know, yeah.
And so-
we like tea around
I have to
here.
go. I have to go. Unfortunately, I have to go back.
There's some type of fruitiness or something.
The smell.
Oh, so the sweetener includes monk fruit, whatever that is.
That's probably like the.
That's
Derek,
the weird.
is it
is
like
that
a
the
it's got a
lemon?
nice. It's got a nice slow finish. I think
No, it
I'm
doesn't.
tasting a little. I'm tasting a little licorice on the back end.
Yeah, it's not a nice finish.
Yeah.
It is.
I don't have a greedy bone in my body. I'm gonna give mine to Gigi.
No, don't do that to my mom.
Okay, that's the last one.
That's
Go
being
for.
that's being mean to my mom.
And yeah,
I-
I guess it tastes like Tennessee. If Tennessee tastes like a basement,
Rock
That's the best I got.
you'll
it
always
tastes like a
be.
basement.
yeah. So this is called, for our listeners, it's
Or it
again,
tastes like a basement smells.
Ryl Company, the Ryl Company, I guess is how they probably say it.
And I
Sweet tea, but it's not. It's zero sugar, artificial sweeteners, obviously.
It has a little bit of a taste like some northern sweet teas, which are so lemony that I don't like them. Now this
See,
one's not real
I mean,
lemony,
it's
but
got
it's
some
got
kind
that
of fruit.
tang to it.
Does
to me.
anybody know what monk fruit
I do not.
resembles?
Well,
not really.
Guys, you know what would make this better, and I'm being serious. If you poured it out.
Yeah, it really. If you dumped it down the drain, it really.
I don't
would.
think we'll be fighting over each other's cans here today.
And I don't. And so I'm also. I don't think you can. It's hard to do. First of all, it's really really hard to can sweet tea.
yeah, it
Yeah.
is.
Okay,
probably
so
so.
I don't know why companies bother, because it's really hard to can it.
My mamaw used to do it.
Can it
Like
metal can.
That was moonshine.
Like
Yeah,
it-
yeah,
oh,
that
oh,
was, that was right.
yeah.
Oops.
So it's really hard to can sweet tea. Really difficult to do. Probably even harder to can zero sugar, and then whatever their sweetener is just okay,
little fruity of some-
and then I would guess that the monk fruit and stevia is just not doing-
Stevia is great.
Stevia
by
is fine.
itself.
It's not. That's not what
Okay, so
the.
it's
I don't
just-
think that's what the
Okay,
issue is.
sorry, I was just those are lumped together. So
Are they interesting?
Yeah.
Eric, maybe they're trying to accomplish too many things.
Can you
in
get
one
us a?
drink.
Can you get us a? No one will be able to see it, Derek. But can you get us a picture of monk? At least get a picture of monk fruit. and send it to the group?
I'm going one there first. Say, what does monk fruit taste like, and see if
Yeah.
sweet
I mean-
tasted is often described as similar to sugar.
Monk
Let's see, but it doesn't say that.
High fructose, sucrose, whatever. I don't know.
Allulose. That's the part of the sweetener. Zero net carbs. That has no effect on blood sugar. So you're
Okay.
good.
Yeah.
It says it right there on the bottle.
Yeah.
The monk
Anyway.
fruit hails from southern China,
Okay.
where it has centuries of history and is lauded for its medicinal uses. I say we just keep it in that arena.
Some medicinal.
Like, just let
It's
it.
medicine.
Let's let monk. Can we make a declaration here on Preacher in the Hat? Let's let monk fruit thrive in its medicinal arena.
That's right.
And let's just leave it there.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, if I need medicine, sometime I could just drink this. I could leave it in the refrigerator until I need some medicine, right? Then.
They have flavors, so Chris will bring you a peach next week.
All right, there you go.
That's rough, boys.
anyways,
Well, moving
all
right along.
Yeah, we're gonna
Does anyone have any gum? No, we can't chew gum.
yeah.
It has an
it
after. It has an
some-
aftertaste
yeah.
to it.
But anyway, so moving along from that, because I'll ASAP. Although the taste is going to stick with me for the rest of this episode. This episode's a little different for us, or for me and you, Eric. Somehow Chris is taking
He's
another
still
drink. I don't
drinking.
understand.
It's growing
He
on
did
me.
that with the face.
Yeah, I know
too.
he did.
It's growing
Yeah,
on me.
I don't know what this guy. But Eric, this episode's a little different for me and you in that we are probably a little bit more. How do I say it?
We're less prepared than Dad.
Yeah,
So it's usually it might usually be the other way around.
Yeah, where we're gonna like kind of prod him about some stuff and get him talking or whatever.
Okay.
We are. I think now we just swing it over to him, which is something we don't normally, normally do to kick off an episode. But buddy, if there are none opposed, we're gonna swing this now to the preacher in the hat.
Wow. Okay, so it doesn't happen very often. Now, I hope this is not too awkward for all of us here. I'm not very spontaneous. I like to have everything scripted and planned out.
Yeah, you struggle with public speaking.
I struggle with public speaking, yeah, especially on spur of the moment. But we'll do our best here. So today we were talking about where should we go, and for the last few episodes we've been talking about Resolute was one of the ones that just came out last week, and when we're speaking now on January the 28th. Last week it came out that we were talking about Resolute, and we talked about change. By the time you hear this, we will have known we talked about some change and how change happens and all that kind of stuff. So I was thinking about that when you were asking me about a story, which we say we're about story. There's a story to tell.
Yeah.
Of joyous victories and hard lessons and that kind of thing, humble beginnings. So I thought we'd talk about a humble beginning for me, actually. And it was kind of a shift in focus because as a pastor, you really, one thing you would say you're in is in the change business. You're about helping people change, seeing people change, Jesus changing people. So you're in that whole thing. And so in the change business, how do people change is a big question. How do people change? And obviously there have been discussions and disagreements and arguments,
books
and
written,
and books and books and books and research
Shelves
and research
of
and
books.
research
Yeah.
and study and study and study about how people change. And so to some degree that's still elusive. I don't think anybody's kind of come up with the formula for change. But on the other hand, there are some things that work better than others, it seems like. And so from my experience, let me put it this way, I found that there's some things that work better when it comes to change than others. One thing, for example, that a lot of us pastors struggle with is we think somehow change will happen if we give good enough advice. If I can come up with a real smart answer for you, Derek, or Chris, or if I can come up with some, and say, this is what I recommend, or this is why don't you try this, or why don't you do this, or why don't you do that? So in my years, starting in prison and then also as a pastor outside, we call it on the streets, I would try different kind of things. You preach the Word of God. The Word of God is powerful and effective, that kind of thing. So the Scripture says it will not return void and that kind of thing. So sometimes you'd be preaching the Word and thinking, yeah, this really happened. So I remember as a young pastor, I used to think that the more intense I was, probably the more effective I was. Now, not intense in the way some people would describe intensity, but, if I said it one time and you didn't get it, maybe if I said it 2 times, you would get it, Chris. Maybe if I said it 3 times, you might get it, and then we got repetition is the key to learning and all that kind of stuff. So I went through that whole thing. I remember for many years sitting in, and I did a lot. I know this is going to be hard for some of y'all to believe who know me because I talk so much sometimes. But in my early days in prison, I listened for hours and hours and hours and hours on end to story after story after story, to problem after problem after problem, to trivia to trivia to trivia. I mean, it was just, I would go down for 2 hours or 2 or 3 hours every morning into lockup area and listen to guys that were locked up and weren't talking to anybody else. So you can imagine what that was like. Now, not everybody likes to talk, but a bunch of them down there did. Yeah. And they had stories to tell, and they would do that. Then I'd come back to my office, and I'd sit for about 2 or 3 hours, and guys would come in. And what I used to say about prison is when a guy came in, I didn't have to interrupt him. He could shift. It was funny. Those guys were good. What they could do is they'd be telling a story, and they just shift gears and tell another one, and shift gears and tell another one. And they were like free associating stuff. You know what I'm saying? That may or may not be linked. And so I developed the habit, which somebody actually Knowlton Argo said it to me the other day. I'm sorry, Cleo. My buddy Cleo said the other day, so you're just sitting there going, okay. That's where I learned that. So I thought maybe listening to people would be what would change them, right? Sometimes giving advice, sometimes just how many times have you ever heard people say, well, I just needed to talk.
Yeah.
I feel better now, right? Right. So let's think about it for a minute. What are some things that through the years that you, with your children or with your spouse or at work or so forth, what are some things that you've thought maybe that might work to help change them? Or have you never been concerned about that? What do you think? Anything come to your mind that you've tried? I tried listening. I tried giving advice. Anything else y'all think of? Chris, you think of anything?
Yeah, we kind of got into a little spat the other night because I tried to fix her problem instead of listening.
Oh, yeah. So if you're a problem solver,
Yeah.
if you become the problem solver, that'll change them. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. That's common.
She didn't want it fixed.
She didn't want it fixed.
Or you can also like you can almost get, I have to watch myself that I don't get like expository, like explaining why you feel, like trying to tell you why you feel the way you feel. It's like, I don't have the right to do that. I don't really know what's going on there, but like, that's something, not just because the fixing can be a problem for me too, but then also like trying to explain it for you, which is not really
Hey, if you don't want me to
helpful.
fix it, don't tell me about it.
Also, that really kind of borders on the way you change somebody is you read their mind and then tell them what time it is, right? I mean, I'm trying to categorize this stuff that y'all are talking about because I think it's common. What you're describing is common, is trying to explain it, diagnose it. Some people try to diagnose what somebody else's problem is, right? And then solve it for them. Chris, they say, for example, what you were doing is common among men. Common in men. They want to problem solve, and there's not actually that can be a very big strength. At work, you got troubleshoot sometimes.
All
and so
the time.
it's a really all the time. Yeah, it's a really cool skill to have. But in terms of changing people, it might change a task if you troubleshoot and problem solve. It may change the direction that you're going, in a task or something else that you're required to do. But when it comes to people and people changing, solving their problems for them, develops what we talked about this one night, called learned helplessness is what happened. So I was going along and using all of the things y'all talking about. And then in the year 2000, about 20 years in ministry and prison stuff, I encountered something that later came to be known as transformational prayer. And some people describe it as listening prayer, which I kind of like. I like listening prayer. It's pretty cool. And it revolutionized the things I did. Now, I want you to hear me. We're not talking about a magic pill here. We're not talking about we found the strategy that works. I'm not saying that. But what I did find is that this process really, really changed some things for me, and I noticed it started changing some other people. Much, much quicker, much better, but it was not anything that I was doing to them. It was something I was participating with them in. So I went to a Larry Crabb conference. A Neil Anderson Freedom in Christ conference up in Tennessee, and there was a man named Ed Smith who had started doing some writing and practicing of something that we now know as transformational prayer, and it intrigued me the way he described it. It also seemed theologically proper to me. Not proper. That's not really a good word. It seemed consistent. It seemed theologically okay. It seemed right. And so I came back and started practicing it. I remember there was one man, his name is Ken, that I was working with, and we had been doing some stuff and doing some work on anger. And before I went to the conference, and I would meet with him, and we had some really good interactions, and sometimes, and I'm not saying it didn't help him at all, just sitting and talking and doing some discipleship, talking about the scriptures and that kind of thing. When I came back, I said, do you mind if I just do this? I said, what if we sat in this session and let Jesus be the counselor instead of me? What if we just did? I said, I don't know if this works or not. I said, I've not really done it. And we just jumped in. And later on, Ken would tell some people with tongue in cheek, although he was somewhat seriously, he said, I used to meet with Steve and he would actually work and help me through things. He said, now he just sits there and does nothing, and Jesus does all the work. That's one of the best compliments I ever could have. Number two, let me tell you what happened. When I would get done meeting with people, I would not be near as tired as I was prior to learning this way of going about it. Because it would just wear me out. If you're the one who has to listen, put the information in, process the information, come up with a potential, what's the problem here? Should we go down this way, and then come up with a potential solving of that problem? That's a lot of dadgum work. I'm serious, man. That's a lot of work.
Sure. Yes.
It'll wear you out. You just come out and you go, I can't do that anymore. I remember coming out of prison and I'd be like, hey, we talked about this when we did the prison files, that just being in that prison, you could come out exhausted and you didn't seem like you did that much. But I was processing a lot of things. So I am very grateful that at that period of time in my life that I was introduced to this new way of approaching things, a new way, along with some other new ways, but that was a primary way. It changed my whole perception on helping people.
So let's talk a little bit about what exactly we're talking about, because some folks, maybe hear transformational prayer and they think, well, prayer is transformational in and of itself, right? So, but we're specifically talking about almost like digging out lies and falsehoods or whatever, and replacing them with truth, which is what the work that you're talking about that Jesus does instead, while you sit back, whatever. So you want to give like a little bit of almost like a real quick, like 2-minute sample session of what it would look like.
Let me just put it in context this way, that I've learned since then, and more recently, a context for it. And it's called WLVS, W-L-V-S. Wounds, lies, vows, and strongholds. So the idea is that's the wounds, lies, vows, and strongholds are the things that happen to us that often lead to a lot of trouble. Okay, let me describe it. Nobody can live in this life without being wounded in some way, shape, or another. By my own sin, by the sins of others, by death and sickness, by people around me. And so life wounds you. I don't care how good your childhood is. I don't care. You get wounded by some stuff. Maybe it's by something somebody said, something's done that you had no control over. And sometimes it might be things you have control over.
I thought we would have gotten an amen after that.
I thought so
you're
too.
on a mic. You're on a hot mic.
That's just as good as an amen.
Hey, that is.
Interestingly, Dr. Marcus Warner says then that when we're wounded, there's two farmers standing by. The one farmer is the lying farmer who plants lie seeds in that wound. Wound is like a furrow in the heart, or a furrow in the brain, that one farmer plants lie seeds. There's another farmer there who plants truth seeds. And the interesting thing is that all of us have had the lying farmer plant seeds in our brain. So the lies are not so much in what has happened to us, but how we perceive what happened to us. You see, how we felt it, how we experienced it. Like you were saying, Eric, a while ago about, trying to see how somebody felt and how they should be.
Yeah.
It's very true that we all experience that differently sometimes. Sometimes we feel it the same. So then thirdly, that lie over a period of time develops into a strong, into a vow where we say, this is what I think about life, which then leads us to a stronghold, which can involve, a stronghold can be anything from anxiety, it can be anger, it can be fear, it can be lack of intimacy with God, it can be addictions. A lot of times we try to go in changing, we try to begin with the stronghold and just stop smoking them cigarettes, stop being angry. God don't want you to do that. Stop worrying. That works, right? Somebody tells you stop worrying. It just doesn't work. But this process, what this process does is help me go back to the wounds, the lies that were planted in the wounds, the vows that came out of that. Let's say, for example, I'm wounded by somebody who betrays me at a very early age. Maybe that could be any kind of abuse. It could be very, very, it doesn't have to be called abuse. It could be something, a very terrible statement, like you'll never amount to anything. That's a wound. When a child's told you'll never amount to anything, it's a wound. And so then the lie that comes, I believe I'm never amount to anything. I mean, my mama told me that. Mm-hmm. And so we believe it. And the vow is when we get older, I'll never get any better. It's just the way I am. And the stronghold then is learned helplessness. I will never do it. So what we do is we try to go back to what are those wounds in this prayer time? What are the lies we believed as a result of that wound? How did it become a vow in our life if it did? And then how did that lead to a stronghold? So we go back, I call it, to the origin. So in this process, then we find that people say that study the brain, say that everything has happened, there's a picture of it in your brain. Now, you can't pull that picture up at will. Nobody can. And counselors try to pull it up, but why not let Jesus pull it up? Even to remind me of what was the original wound. Help me expose what was the lie I believed in that moment. So I don't think I've told the story, have I, of how I had a stronghold until I was 45 years old of being afraid to go to the doctor. Have I told that? So here's
on this podcast.
On this podcast,
I don't believe so.
I don't believe I have. Did I?
No.
Well,
I thought we were close. I've never heard this story.
Well, yeah, I'm not totally sure because I know it.
He knows the story.
It's not like I'm trying to think. Have we talked about it on the?
Yeah,
I don't know that
I don't
we
think
have.
we
On
have.
the show.
I don't think we have. It involves you two guys, too. Not the wound. Not that you got the wound, but I couldn't go to the doctor. Every time I went to the doctor, my blood pressure would be sky high. I mean, and I'd pray about it. I'd try to relax. I'd try to tell myself this is ridiculous. And so when I went to the doctor, my blood pressure would be sky high. When I was in my early 30s, you guys' age, I went to a doctor in Cahaba Heights, and my blood pressure was 200 over 100. 200 over 100.
That's like you should
Is
go
that
to
not
the
good?
emergency room. Kind of.
Those bad numbers.
Those are bad numbers, Chris.
They sound-
My doctor.
He's like, because if those are those that bad? Because I might need to make a call.
Follow me here, Chris. Follow me. Stay with me. Okay. Yes, those are bad numbers. But my doctor looked at me and he said, "I don't think you have high blood pressure." He said, "I think." And in the medical profession, and your wife especially will know, probably have heard this phrase. It's an old school phrase. I call it white coat syndrome.
Yeah.
You've heard it? Mm-hmm. White coat syndrome. So that means that when, some people, when they come in here, their blood pressure's high. Yeah. So he said, get your wife to have you have a blood pressure cuff? I said, yeah. Your mama, my wife was a nurse. And he said, let her take your blood pressure for the next 3 months. at different random times. And so she did. And guess what? She rewrote it down. I took it back to him, and my blood pressure was fine, except when I went to the doctor's office. So what is this about? So a need for this kind of prayer that we're talking about, Derek, to answer your question a little bit, is it most exposed when my emotions are more than the situation calls for.
Say that one more time.
There's a need that's exposed when I see that my emotions are more than the situation calls for. In this case, my anxiety level was not warranted. Because when I was going to the doctor, I wasn't going, I was just going for a checkup, right? But when I go, and so I kept having this anxiety. And I got tired of it. And we were living in Homewood, Alabama, and I was going to the doctor one day, and I had it again. And I thought, this is ridiculous. I've been a pastor for 20-something years. I've tried to help people with their anxiety and fear, and I just can't get done with this. And so finally I said, God, take me back to the first time I had the same feeling I have right now as I'm about to go to this doctor. And I went back to it, and he took me back to the wound, to the circumstance that was a wound, and the lie that I believed. And that was this. I was in the back seat of a 57 Chevrolet car on the way to my mother, who was rushing me to the emergency room. That never happened growing up. I'm 5.5 years old. I still remember it. I'm 67 now. I can still remember being in the back seat of that car, and my mom was taking me in the middle of the day. My temperature was 106 degrees. When my mother, who was not an outwardly dramatic person, your grandmother, she wasn't that, but I knew she was a worrier. And when she's taking me and rushing me to the hospital, Grandpa's at work, my dad, your grandfather, he was at work, and she's taking me in the middle of the day. That is real unusual. What do you think a 5.5-year-old Chris thinks when he's being rushed to the emergency room at 5.5 years with 106-degree fever? What do you think might be going through his brain? What lie could be planted in his brain pretty easily right then?
This is it.
I'm going to die. You know what's strange? All my life I thought I was going to die early. From that point on. I didn't realize this until I'm 45.
And look at you, a chiseled 67.
That's what I'm talking about. Look
all
at me.
Beef patty.
For no reason.
Special sauce.
No reason to think this.
Woo! Glory! Was it that funny?
What does that mean?
I don't want to know. Let's keep moving on. When I was a teenager, I remember sitting at my desk, and I would cross out the days on my calendar. And I remember sitting at my desk. I was probably 13 years old. Now, I was not suicidal. I was not depressed. It wasn't that. I really enjoyed life, as a kid. But I remember thinking, I'm not going to live past that day. And I wasn't even upset about it. As I kept going in life, I kept thinking, well, I'm just going to die. I just assumed I was going to die early. I thought God was preparing me. I did things early. I got married when I was 20, had our first child when we were 23, became a pastor when I was 22. And so I just kind of thought I'm doing everything early. You know what I'm saying? And I didn't think about it a lot. It wasn't something that was on my mind. But every time I went to the doctor, I'm scared out of my mind. Still, my blood pressure is still high. In my 30s, into my 40s. And so when I'm praying in my 40s, and he's taking me back to that moment, the next thing that happened, Chris, in my bedroom, with Lenore there to help me, was this happened. I said, Lord Jesus, I believed I was going to die in that moment. My emotions were so high, I couldn't hear you, but you were there, and you wanted to tell me something. And this is how that process works. Lord Jesus, you wanted to tell Steve something. What did you want to tell me? Lenore prayed that for me. And the next thing I heard in my head, it was just as loud as if you said it. Now you can never, y'all put up your right hand and say, I will never call Steve this ever.
I've already made this
Steve
pledge.
this ever.
I've already made this pledge.
He's already
I've
made
heard the
this
story.
pledge. He's heard
I've
the
made the
story.
Company of men.
I've made this pledge.
So what do you think my nickname was when I was 5.5? Stevie. Okay, so
Okay, that's not a stretch.
that's not a stretch.
No.
But at 45 years old, Chris, I heard the voice of God say to me in that bedroom, Stevie, you're going to be all right. As simple as that. And I knew it was the voice of God. Not audibly, but just as loudly as if it was audible. Stevie, you're going to be all right. Well, guess what? I went to the doctor. I go to the doctors now. Sometimes I'm a little bit, a little bit anxious about it, but nothing that overwhelms me in the same way, unless the doctor tells you might have cancer, which was not true back last June. But anyhow, that knocked me out for just a moment. But then again, I remembered this incident where he told me, Stevie, you're going to be all right. Along the way, Chris, you don't know this part, they do, is when these two boys were born, I thought that I would never live long enough to see them grow up.
And 2,900 Atlanta Brave games later,
Yeah,
here you are.
here we are. But
That's
you know what happened at age 20, when they were 21, in front of Grace and Truth Church, I told this story. And I looked at the church, and I looked at these two, and I said, these boys are 21 and they are grown, and I am still here.
Yeah.
Because the truth was, Stevie, you're going to be all right. The lie I believed when I was 5.5 was that I was going to die. That was not the truth. I'm going to die one day. I'm okay with that. I understand that. But what I know now, and in these moments down through the years, 2 years later, about 2 or 3 years later, after that incident where I heard, Stevie, you're going to be all right, I got as sick as I've ever been in my life. My appendix died, and I didn't know it. And it was leaking infection in my abdomen. They had to go in and have do emergency surgery on me. I was in the hospital for 5 days. And you can get septicemia from this stuff. I mean, the doctor said that it walled it off. But I mean, I was really a sick man. I could have died easily with that because it was leaking infection for quite a while. But do you know, I went into that hospital knowing how sick, after I was there all night in the emergency room, and they said, we're going to do emergency surgery at 6 o'clock in the morning. I knew then that there's a possibility I could have died with what I had. Do you know I wasn't scared? Do you know I wasn't fearful? I remember being wheeled into the room and into the surgery room. I looked up on the wall, and there was a picture of somebody's abdomen up there. It was all over the place. I said, Doc, is that me? He said, yeah. And the thought went through my mind is, well, maybe this is it. Probably not, but if it is, I've had a great life. I was 47, maybe 48 years old at that time, whatever 2004 was. But what I'm saying is, it was the hospital experience. It sounds weird to say, but while in the hospital having surgery, my mother was on hospice, and 24 hours after surgery, she died. And I got a phone call for it. Do you know, I still look back on that experience in that hospital without fear, without misery, and I really hesitate to say this in a company of men or a company of women, but to say I enjoyed that experience would not be a stretch. I don't even understand it. It doesn't make sense to me. All I know is I don't live with that lie anymore. You're going to die.
Stevie, you're going to be all right.
And I've heard it, Chris, several times when I'd have some ailments. One time I heard it again. It says, Stevie, you're going to be all right. Just take care of yourself. You know what I'm saying? It wasn't like go on and do what you want to do and be a fool. You're going to be all right. It was like you just take care of yourself. That's all you need to do. And I've heard it through the years. You see, when the lie is pulled out, he replaces it with truth. But see, Jesus told me that. Derek didn't tell me, Dad, you're going to be all right. Eric didn't tell me. Lenore didn't tell me. No preacher told me. Jesus told me. And so Jesus is the counselor, and when he says it, and you are a child of his, you believe it. And when you believe it, it begins to have effects in your life that are unbelievable. And they're almost automatic. You know what I'm saying? The consequences of the lie were automatic, right? In my autonomic nervous system, I was just an anxiety. But now I don't have the same thing in my autonomic nervous system. So I like to tell that story whenever I'm praying with somebody, Derek and Eric and Chris. And the reason I like to tell that story is to help them to see that this stuff, Jesus is smart. Say this out loud, Chris. Jesus is smarter than any of us.
Jesus is smarter than any one of us.
That's right. And I have prayed with hundreds, literally. I quit counting about 15 years ago at 350 people, different people I have prayed with, using the same thing. And I just did it on the phone. I've done it on the phone. I've done it this week with somebody. I'm doing it on the phone with people. I pray with people sometimes. I do the same thing. And I'm serious. Jesus shows up time after time. And because I've been in his presence in the presence of other people, when it happens, I've seen it work with grandchildren, Chris. They know these stories with grandchildren who all of a sudden couldn't eat and didn't want to eat. I've heard Jesus tell them the truth, and it changed it. It didn't change everything automatically, but it was a process of change. So here's what I know, what I've learned, is Jesus is the only one that can really change anybody. Steve doesn't. Steve can help facilitate the presence of Jesus. Steve can help facilitate looking at the wounds, the lies, the vows, and the strongholds. But when the truth is, when the lie is exposed and the truth is planted and pulled up, and the truth is planted, it does some stuff that just still blows my mind. I've seen it work with people who have had ritual abuse in their lives, sexual abuse. I've seen it with people who grew up religious and just heard something crazy in church that was a wound. It runs the gamut, because here's our enemy is this, and I'll finish with this as far as explaining it. In John 8, Jesus told the disciples, he said, I'm not disciples, he told the religious people of his day, he said, your father is the devil. And when your father lies, he speaks his native language. You see, if the enemy of our souls, and he's out to destroy all of us, can plant a lie in my life in the middle of a wound, he can plant that lie and walk away, and it'll still have destructive. It can still have destructive sorts of things in our lives. But Jesus comes to heal us from the inside out. And the way he does it, it's not a power encounter. It's not a casting out a spirit all the time. It's just what it is it's exposing a lie, pulling it up, and replanting truth inside of it. You said 2 or 3 minutes. That's a lot longer.
That was much longer than 2 to 3 minutes, but I think it was extremely valuable. And for what we know about all of this is that Jesus is going to keep speaking truth, because that's what he does. We're going to keep talking about it because that's what we do. This has been another episode of Preacher in the Hat. My name is Derek. For Eric across from me, Steve for leading this one. Thank you so much for sharing all of that. And we might touch again on some more transformational prayer. I think we've got some more to talk about.
I think so too.
Chris behind the cameras. Once again, this has been Preacher in the Hat. Thank you all for joining us.